Meeting is recorded. We're here for the I-205 Tolling Diversion Subcommittee, which is a subcommittee of C4, and Commissioner Savas and Mayor Walters are the co-chairs. We have a presentation by WSP and the ODOT team to start us off, and then most of the meeting will be dedicated to a broad Q&A of sorts. And so we'll let y'all have the meeting, Commissioner and Mayor.
Mayor, I guess we don't have much of an agenda, so welcome everyone, and glad you're all here. I was hoping we'd have at least someone from Oregon City here this morning or this afternoon. Perhaps we will, but I do know that summertime is a difficult time for everyone with vacations and so forth. I do know that Adam Marl is on vacation this week, but I didn't know if he had a replacement stepping in this morning or this afternoon. So who from ODOT is presenting today?
The whole team. I'll just say that Oregon City, they're down to just 3 commissioners. They do have 2 staff here, and so they are present by nature of the team.
Okay.
Cool.
Should we start off?
I think so, yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again for having us. I'm Mandy Putney with ODOT's Urban Mobility Office. I'm going to start off the slide deck here, and Chris Wellender will do a bulk of it. We also have invited Peter Bosa from Metro to join us and help support some sections of our slide deck today. We don't have nearly as many slides as we had last time, so we do intend there to be quite a bit of time for Q&A. And my suggestion would be that we go through the slides and then do the Q&A if that works for the group. But if there is a burning question and you want to raise your hand, I will yield to that desire as well. So today we really do want to address some of the questions that came up the last time. We had questions about modeling inputs and analysis. So we have some additional information on specific inputs into the transportation model, some key modeling assumptions that are being used for our environmental analysis. And then, as I said, plenty of time for general Q&A. Next slide, please. Just as a recap, we are moving forward with the environmental assessment for the 205 toll project. Looking at the draft environmental assessment to come out this fall in the November timeframe, and still the final document by the end of first quarter of 2023, and the federal decision at that point. So no significant change there. Next slide, please. I did want to share this example waterfall graphic that does show some of the terminology that's used when we talk about revenue related to tolling. And we've shared this with the commission before in a variety of forms. And I will say, we are early in the process, so we don't know exactly how the 205 toll revenue waterfall will end up looking. This is some typical elements that are considered when you're looking at the gross toll revenue and moving to a conversation about net toll revenue. So I'm going to walk through this quickly, but again, we don't have dollar amounts yet. We're not at that phase of our process, but just so that there's some understanding of what the terminology is and the process will be. So we do first start out with the gross toll revenue potential, and then there are some things that start drawing down that revenue potential, and then we figure out what is the net revenue that's left. So first, leakage. This is revenue that doesn't materialize or isn't recognized. So this could be trips that we can't bill because we can't read the license plate. We're not able to verify addresses, or toll revenue that isn't paid. The adjusted gross toll revenue collected includes late payment fees that are assessed when the first toll bill goes unpaid, credit card fees, toll collection, operation and maintenance costs, and facility operation and maintenance costs. And then we get to the net toll revenue. So here we're thinking about debt service, periodic toll equipment, vendor costs such as replacing equipment, and costs for major roadway or structural rehabilitation or project related costs. So those are all aspects of the conversation that the commission will be considering as we move forward and thinking about potential revenue associated with the 205 toll project, and then also a variety of costs that must be considered as we're thinking about bonding and financing. Mayor?
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, but going back to that other slide. So what are the percentages? Are we looking at a graph here that's telling us that 50% of all tolls that are collected are just going to pay for the cost, credit card fees and toll collecting equipment costs?
We don't have percentages at this point. So I'm saying this is an example waterfall graphic really to just illustrate the types of costs that must be accounted for as we're thinking about revenue. And we're getting questions about gross revenue and net revenue. We don't yet know, as the toll facilities are being developed and designed and we have our vendors in place, we'll have much more certainty about what these different costs are.
Okay, and as we use the Seattle area example, do you have percentages from that project that would mirror ours?
I'm sure we could get information from Seattle or other locations. We don't yet know exactly what our equipment will be or who our vendor will be. So I don't yet know that they would be the same as is being experienced elsewhere.
Okay. It would be helpful though to have those numbers, or at least the percentages, if I could make that ask.
Sure, we can get you some information.
Thank you.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, Mandy, of these buckets here, where would the low income program fit in? Which of these buckets would it come out of?
I think it would be a new bucket.
Okay. And how about mitigation projects?
Yeah, so the project is included in like the other uses down there. As I mentioned, project costs, rehabilitation costs, that would include the mitigation for the project.
So Mandy, you've been on this project for a long time, I think dating back to 2017-18, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, so I'm just kind of going off of memory. I have the slides in the packet material, somewhere. But my recollection was at the time we were talking about four or five different tolling points or areas to be tolled, sections to be tolled along the I-205 and I-5 corridor. And my recollection serves me that the average administration costs then were about $300 million per each of those sections. And I remember asking the question, I said, how much of that $300 million is for capital? And I was told none, that it was simply the administration cost for the toll program. So is it safe to assume that now that we're tolling the entire section, that all those numbers would easily be in play today, and then some? Because I think there were 5 areas, let's say 5 times 300 million, that'd be 1.5 billion. Is it fair to say that it's going to be in excess of that to administer this program?
I don't have the numbers that you're referencing from past presentations in front of me, Commissioner. I'm sorry about that, but I can say that any information we likely shared in the past about administration costs were estimates. Again, we do not know the design of our system and the requirements that will be associated. So we don't have numbers at this point for what the administration costs will be. As we have more understanding, as the design of the gantries and the system is in place, we'll be able to identify those numbers, but they don't exist right now.
Okay. So it would really be hard really actually to establish even what a toll rate would be if we don't even know what the admin cost is. That's a fair assumption, right?
Right, and that's why we are not at a place right now where we can establish the toll rate. So when the commission is at the place of setting rates for this project, there will be much more detailed information available in terms of revenue, as well as administration costs and the requirements of the market associated with bonding. So we are very early in the process. At this point, we're looking at rate setting in 2024. Typically, we conclude an investment grade analysis, which is the most detailed level of traffic revenue analysis, about 6 months before we go live with tolling. And we need that in order to move forward with bonding. So we still have quite a bit of time to get the information required for those conversations.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So again, we heard some questions last time just about about terminology and process. So I know that this slide prompts a lot of questions that we're not able to answer, but I did just want people to start understanding kind of some of the terms that you'll hear as we move forward, and some of the things that the financial team at ODOT will be focused on in terms of understanding all of these costs and these requirements. So now I'll turn it over for the model assumption portion of our presentation.
Okay. Thanks, Mandy. So a few weeks back, maybe a month ago, we had a meeting with you all where we went through kind of some basic modeling, what goes into the modeling process, kind of the basic steps, and that we're using for the I-205 tolling EA project. So at the end of that, and there was a lot of slides and we covered a lot of stuff, there were additional questions that really focused on what were the key assumptions that went into the modeling. So we're coming back today to cover a few of those. I want to say that we're really fortunate to have Peter Bosa here from Metro to help elaborate on some of these assumptions. He works with this model on a daily basis, so he's really familiar with it, and he was instrumental in getting this model set for this project. So next slide. So just before we even start about the assumptions, just kind of go through what are the primary inputs that go into modeling, and that give us the travel demand forecasts that we come up with. And there's a host of them, but these are the primary ones. And I thought I'd let Peter just walk through each of these real quickly, and then some of these we're going to elaborate on in a little more detail in later slides here.
Great, thank you, Chris. So I'll introduce myself to those of you who aren't familiar with me. I'm Peter Bosa. I work with Metro under the Modeling Services Department. I've been there for about 16 years now, and our primary task is to maintain and apply the regional travel demand model. And so I spoke briefly about 4 weeks ago, as Chris mentioned. So let's go ahead and talk about some of these primary inputs into our model. So typically when we're doing scenario modeling for a project, we have a base year to establish model calibration to ensure that the model is accurately portraying observed data. It's not always the current year. So in this example, our base year is actually 2015, and our future year is 2045. Those land use assumptions for both the base year and our future year come directly from the most currently adopted regional transportation plan. That was the 2018 RTP. There is a new RTP that is underway, but we have not yet begun the modeling on that. And so as a result, we relied on the 2018 RTP for our base year and future year land use assumptions. So the first set of assumptions here is population. So, and typically we model households. Households have a couple attributes associated with them. That's the age of the head of the household, the household income, and then the size of the household. So how many people are living in the household. This can also include the number of children and, importantly, the number of workers in the household. We also consider information like housing types. So this could be single family housing or multifamily or apartment housing. And then we also use employment data. The employment data is for the base year collected from the census, and then is forecasted using our internal econometric models for future year. And employment is broken down into, I think we currently have 14 different categories. And so there's retail, service, manufacturing, transportation, just a whole host of employment types. We do have an airport model. It's kind of a visitor model. There's not a lot of trip making associated with the airport model on a regional scale. Obviously, it's an important generator for trips locally, but it represents a very small percentage of total or regional trips. We have a simplified freight model that tries to anticipate movements of freight through the region. This includes movements to and from warehouses and from warehouses to different locations throughout the region. Importantly to note, our freight model does not include delivery trips such as Amazon delivery, UPS delivery, et cetera. And that's really kind of a shortcoming of most freight models that are applied in this type of overall regional transportation model. So these are some of the inputs. Then we also have some network inputs. And so the networks include our auto network for the region, which is pretty much all freeways, most major arterials, most major collectors, but does not include most local streets. We don't go to that level of modeling detail. So if you look at the network, you'll probably see the nearest big street to your house, but you won't see the street that leads right to your driveway on it. We also have a transit system. This includes all the buses and light rail, streetcar for TriMet, C-Tran, SMART out of Wilsonville, CAT out of Canby, and I think the SAM, which is out of Sandy. That's provided by TriMet. And the base year is, we kind of know what the base year is. For the future year, it's based on the 2040 financially constrained network assumptions by TriMet. We also have a bike network. It's kind of a bike and pedestrian network. That does include all the streets in the region, as well as kind of off-street trails. And then finally, we have some cost inputs, and those include transit fares. We say tolls in here, but obviously there's no tolls in the base year. In the future year, the only base toll that is actually in the RTP is what's assumed for the CRC, now the I-5 bridge crossing project. And so that's always in flux. There's parking charges that include short-term and long-term parking. And then some assumptions around auto operating costs, which includes the cost of gas, the cost of maintaining a vehicle, like wear and tear on your tires, maintenance, oil changes, et cetera. So those are the primary modeling inputs.
Great. Thanks, Peter. So Peter covered a lot of what we're going to talk about here. And we're talking about two models. One is the regional travel demand model, and those inputs that Peter's just describing go into that model. But that model is also the base for the dynamic traffic assignment model, which we use and covers a sub area, which includes the I-205 toll project area. So these assumptions really apply to both of these models. Peter mentioned the base year calibration is 2015. Our future forecast years, we went out to 2045, but we also forecasted an interim year of 2027. And we'll be talking a little bit more. Well, Peter pretty well covered the land use assumptions in terms of what's assumed in the model for both existing and the future. We'll talk a little more detail about the transportation network assumptions, some of the key facilities that are included. And then because this is a toll project, it's really important to look at the value of time. So because we're testing the toll and people's choice to either take that route and pay the toll or take an alternate path, and they're going to weigh, if it takes longer on that alternate path, is it worth it? And so that's where the model needs to know the value of time for that particular traveler. And then of course we'll talk about the toll rate assumptions that we're using, knowing that the OTC will be setting the actual toll rates. All right, next slide. So I think Peter already covered this pretty well. They're consistent with the RTP. We held the land uses constant across the no build and build alternatives. Next slide. And these were some of the key, as Peter mentioned, the projects transportation improvements included in the RTP's financially constrained list were included in the model. And, some of those were assumed to be in place by 2027 and others by 2040 or 45. And these are some of the key ones with improvements on locations on I-5, 205, Oregon 217, etc. So these were all assumed to be there in the future. Next slide. So I mentioned the value of time assumption, and in the model, and Peter could do a much better job of explaining this, I may have you take a shot at it, but in the model, it converts everything to travel times. So tolls are applied as an equivalent amount of travel time. So if you're going to pay the toll to take this trip, you look at the value of time, convert that to travel time, and add that on to that trip. And then the model makes the choice of which way what choice the traveler will make. So, and the value of time varies depending on who that traveler is. And we'll go next slide. These are the assumptions that are in the model right now. And for value of time, and you can see that it ranges from $6 an hour in off-peak to $61 an hour for heavy trucks, because the movement of freight and the time in doing that is so valuable. Next slide. And then here are the toll rates assumed in the model, and the green bars are those that if you just cross one of the toll points, and the blue bars are if you cross both. They range from, in the off-peak overnight hours of, $1.10 if you cross both, to in the peak hours, $3.80 in the morning and $4.40 in the afternoon peak hours. And you can see it kind of stair steps down and back up depending on the expected level of traffic during those timeframes. So that is really it. And we've left over a half hour here for questions, either on this or other things related to the project.
Yeah, could you go back to the second last slide, the one with the dollars per hour, no, one before that?
Value of time, yeah.
Value of time. So can you give me an example of how, let's just say the first one at $8 an hour, or $6 an hour? Can you give me an example how one would apply that? So you're a person of low income at $25,000 now. You're basically saying that hour of time, if they were being paid, is worth $8 an hour, or just what?
I might let Peter jump in here because this is a key component of the model. And I think he could do a better job explaining it than I could, if you don't mind.
Sure, Chris, I'll take a stab at it. Value of time it is a complicated concept to explain, but generally speaking, a lower value of time means that you see any toll as being more onerous than if you had a higher value of time. So I'm not going to give, I can't do the calculation in my head here for how this might look. But let's take the low income $8 an hour and versus the high income $22 an hour. Essentially, what this shows is that if you have a value of time of $8 an hour, the toll will appear 3 times as onerous, almost 3 times as onerous than if you had a higher $22 value of time. And this then applies to medium trucks and heavy trucks. So they're carrying commodities that are very valuable. Getting them delivered on time is very important, and as such, they view any toll on the freeway not as being not onerous, just less onerous than if, you know, maybe you had a discretionary trip, you're going to go to the store, but you don't really need to go to the store. And so you see, you know, a $4 toll, and you're like, you know, I'm going to wait till the shoulder period, or maybe I'm going to save it to another day when it's not as expensive. Whereas if you had a high value of time, you might see the $4 toll and say, you know what, that really doesn't mean much to me. I have such a high value of time that I'm willing to pay that just for the little bit of savings. So that's how it works rudimentarily. Are there other questions regarding this, or is there did I not make that clear? This is a really, it's a tough concept, and I constantly have to revisit this whenever we're programming our networks or doing presentations to committees.
Well, yeah, as a business owner, former business owner, I can certainly make sense out of the truck number. I guess, again, value in people's time, if they have revenue that they're free to let go of, or not, if they don't have those resources. So I see Christine Lewis, Councilor Lewis, your hand's up.
Sure. Yeah, I have a broader kind of philosophical question about this slide and using an assumption like this. Economic models work, and they are just that, models, because one of the biggest breakdowns is that the models assume perfect information, and people are fallible and never have perfect information and always have bias. And that generally works out in our economy okay, because there are leaders and drivers that help set trends. However, with the resentment of tolling and the trend of distrust, and this isn't how we do things in Oregon, I worry that we can't use the assumption that there will be enough leaders or users to actually make this model come to fruition. So philosophically, this is the job that we asked you to do. This is the job you should be doing. You should be using this kind of economic model. But I think we've got a sociological challenge that's going to mean that the economics mean absolutely nothing, because there's so much resistance and we don't have the ability to get our arms around what we're paying for and how to sell it to the population. So we're going to fall outside of that norm of, sure, we don't have perfect information, but we have actors who are still acting rationally. We're not going to act rationally.
I think those are good points to make, Councilor Lewis. I appreciate them. I will say that the toll program moving forward will be doing extensive public outreach and communication about tolling and the toll program. And as we move forward with our analysis, we'll be better equipped at being able to present the like basically the business case, but in layman's terms, in terms of what you get for the toll, knowing that for every person, it will be a calculus of like, is this worth it for me? So we're trying to use the best of the best that we have in terms of the modeling that's available. And I think, you know, the Metro model is a really solid foundation for that. You're right, it is ultimately it is a model. This approach has worked well elsewhere, and so that all that said, I think your comments are helpful, and I appreciate them.
And can I just follow up on that too? I think those are really insightful comments also. And I know in the Puget Sound region, when the first toll was implemented, now there's several tolls in the area, but on 520, the first toll that covered the full facility, it took a while. There were people that just on the principle of it were not going to pay that toll, even if it meant, you know, they took an extra hour to get to work. It took, you know, 6 months to a year before it kind of settled down. And, you know, a lot of that sentiment has gone away and people have gotten used to it and actually appreciate, because that facility was so congested before tolling began, that, you know, they really appreciate having a reasonable trip across it. It's not exactly analogous to here, but to this location, but I do think that over time people start getting used to it, and that, you know, that I'm not going to pay a toll just on principle starts to go away.
Okay, Councilor Sherman.
There we go. Just want to kind of hone in on this slide a little bit more, just so I can kind of wrap my head around, you know, so am I to take away from this that, you know, when we look at kind of the value of time on an hourly basis, is the calculation effectively, if my decision would take me 15 minutes of additional travel time, then effectively on that kind of per hour basis for a low income individual, that's like a $2 differential. Like that's kind of the trigger point where you're going to say, you know, or I mean, is there some connection there? And the reason I asked that question is because, you know, without low income program in place, it kind of makes it, I say, based on kind of the numbers that were laid out in, you know, in the kind of assumption page, you know, a low income individual is potentially going to divert every single time if it's, you know, a short diversion to save that money. Whereas it, based on kind of this, if my theory is correct about that, then in this case, a high income individual would probably never divert, because in theory, it you know, unless it's going to take you an hour out of the way or half an hour out of the way, you're going to do that. Am I interpreting that correctly, or am I reading too much into kind of that hourly rate and then trying to translate that into a trip decision?
Do you want to take it, Peter?
Sure. Yes. And that's a very astute observation. And that's the accurate interpretation looking at this slide. There is, I will say this slide is a bit misleading. We have it divided by income segmentation. So low income, medium income, high income, when actually what we're trying to model is low value of time, high value of time, medium value of time. And we recognize that regardless of your income level, depending on your circumstance, and even depending on the day, your value of time can change. So for example, if you have to get to a shift job that begins at a specific time and you're running late, your value of time is probably very high, regardless of your income level. or if you have a doctor's appointment, or if you have to pick a child up from daycare. So I want to stress that though this slide has a value of time associated with an income level, moving forward, the work that we've been doing actually associates different values of time with different income levels. So we recognize there will be people with low values of time, medium values of time, and high values of time, and those don't necessarily correspond with your income level. So yes, according to the slide, all low income users would appear to be discouraged from using a tolled facility. But in the way that we're actually applying this, that's not necessarily the case.
Okay, that's reasonable. I mean, and the reason I asked that question is, just thinking I'll throw, since my wife is out of earshot, I'll throw her under the bus in this conversation. Is there, and luckily there are no TriMet people on the Zoom today, so that's an okay phrase to use. So she enjoys going from our house in Happy Valley over to the mall over on 217. I'm drawing a blank on Washington Square, and she had made a comment to me one day as we were kind of going through this discussion. It was actually the discussion on regional pricing, but that kind of ties into this as well. And her question was, how much do you think it's going to cost me to go over to Washington Square? And based on the kind of the numbers, if it's that we see today, just from a real general assumption perspective, it's about $8 to go through, in each direction. Did I read that correctly? If you're going to go out, well, actually, no, if you were going to hit both, it was going to be about $8 total in both directions. And I, in knowing what her perspective is, and we, without telling you specifically where we fall in the income categories, her take on it is, I'll take the surface streets. I have all the time in the world to spend getting over there. And so I am absolutely not going to pay a toll, even if it makes my life more convenient. And I think this was alluded to, it's kind of on the principle of it. And I do have a concern about that, because I think that is a reasonable observation for a lot of people. So I guess that the question then ultimately is, I guess what Councilor Lewis, how do you adjust for the uncertainties of that? I mean, are you able to kind of model as you go through the modeling process, you do kind of a baseline, you understand how things are, and then you stress test the model based on certain types of outcomes. If nobody does this, what happens? If everyone does it, what happens? And then all points in between. Do you do like kind of Monte Carlo simulation type testing on some of these outcomes?
That would be ideal for sure. Unfortunately, the model is too coarse in resolution to do that type of simulation. That's our next generation of models. We probably be able to do that to give individuals a value of time that might vary depending on the trip purpose or the time of day. The one thing I will say, and this might get a little weedy, so I apologize ahead of time, is that the models work towards an equilibrium, meaning that they're constantly looking for the shortest travel time between locations. And once you've gotten an equilibrium where you can't really change your route to improve your travel time, then we say that the model is converged. In the example of your wife maybe deciding to take the surface streets to Washington Square, if she decides to do that and other people decide to do that, then you have more traffic on the surface streets, less traffic on the freeway. This improves the travel time on the freeway relative to the surface streets, which are now worse. And so now that travel on the surface streets that might have been 45 minutes might be an hour. And at that point, you might say, if I take the freeway, that's only 25 minutes. Okay, $8 was a lot when that trip on the freeway was 45 minutes, but now that it's only 25, $8 seems much more reasonable to save me 20 minutes. I mean, that's a very coarse example, but that's what's happening in these models. There's these constant trade-offs between, oh, I want to avoid the penalty, the time penalty, perceived time penalty of the toll, so I take a different route. That route is longer. Other people are taking it, which makes it even longer. So now the original route with the toll seems more appealing. And so there's this constant trade-off back and forth until eventually everybody seems happy in the model. There's no improvement to travel times. So I know that's a weedy answer to your observation, but that's essentially what's happening.
No, I appreciate your feedback. Thank you.
Counselor Bieltowski.
Thanks, Commissioner. I appreciate this presentation. My concern, obviously, with a model like this is just that when you're segmenting people into incomes, someone that makes $30,000 or $40,000 on the lower end of the medium income category is going to have a much less, I guess, much less dollar per hour than someone at 100,000, in this sort of simulation, and the toll will have a much bigger impact on them. I don't know if we can like segment more often, like 25 to 40, 40 to 55,000, et cetera, because it's just kind of concerning to see such wide, income levels and grouped into one category. But I just wanted to state that because I was just concerned when I saw that. The question I have is, how does this model kind of factor in diversion and people's behavior? I guess this is what's been talked about before with Councillor Sherman and Councillor Lewis, but I just would like to see also more surveys of people, and once tolls go in, if they go in, they're kind of going down that way. Can we not get caught up in models so often and look at what's actually happening on the ground? Because I think that'll be useful as well. Not to say that models aren't useful. I just know there's a lot of models, and sometimes the models can't factor in those sorts of choices that people make when it's actually happening. So those are my 2 cents. Thanks for the information.
Once we have tolling, we'll definitely look at real world, what's happening, and not rely on the model. So we'll be able to actually see what's happening and monitor that as it moves forward. I'll see if Peter wants to address the income segmentation and why those were the breaks. And
Sure. Thank you, Mandy. So the income segmentation that you see here is actually, it is defined in the model. This income segmentation is used because we have noticed when we estimate these models that there are transportation decisions that are impacted actually by your household income. And these were logical breaks for where those impacts might occur. And so not only does it apply to the reaction to tolling, but also maybe the number of vehicles that you own in a household, or your access to like a bicycle or other forms. There's a lot that's associated with income that was not specifically designed in our model for tolling. With that said, again, this slide here is a little bit misrepresentative of what we're doing in the model. What we're really doing is, so I'll back up and say that surveys from all over the nation, and including FHWA guidance, has basically points to the fact that there is a strong correlation between income level and like a general value of time. But that said, as I explained before, values of time can vary quite a bit depending on your circumstances. So what we're actually doing is, for low income, we assume that most people see the lower value of time, but there's a percentage of low income that sees a medium value of time, so like the $17 an hour, and the high value of time, the 22. If we move to a medium income, most of the medium income sees a medium value of time, but there's a percentage that sees low value of time and high value of time. Again, I think we have other slides out there that are more that better illustrate how we're actually applying value of time in our model. But your point is well taken. A blanket assumption of value of time based on income level is, while it's recommended by FHWA, if you can't do a lot of segmentation, in our model, we've gone a step beyond and assumed multiple values of time.
I appreciate that. I was just thinking, someone closer to 25, someone at 30,000 might have a $10 an hour value of time, while someone higher up in the income would be more like 17 perhaps, or 19. It's so hard to do a perfect model, but I just wanted to flag that, kind of stating the obvious, but thank you.
Sure,
for
yes.
addressing that.
And I'll be the first to admit that all models are wrong. They're just generalizations, right? They help us understand complex situations. I'm not going to go and start buying real estate based on the outcomes of our model. I'll be the first to admit, but they do I think a fairly good job in the medium term if our inputs or if our assumptions are correct, and especially around like households and employment, they tend to actually calibrate pretty well or validate in the future. If you look 5-10 years into the future, they tend to validate pretty well. But obviously there's things that can occur that can change people's behavior. The prevalence of telework with COVID is one thing that's, I think, maybe changed a lot of values of time, and changed maybe the commute patterns, trip making patterns. It's something that's not necessarily reflected in our model because we haven't had the survey data to actually develop kind of those relationships.
Yeah, one thing I want to interject here. This is a great conversation. I know we have about 10 minutes left before at the end of our meeting, so I don't know what we want to accomplish between in these last 10 minutes. But one thing I want to put out there is that when the 91 freeway built their first express lane back in the 70s, I used that to go back and forth to work every day, and it was effective for me because there was traffic congestion. I did get an increase in time. There was some value to it for me, but that system was very short. It didn't really go throughout the whole region, but they built that system and it grew. But the other thing too is that there was a lot of capacity on the system itself. And what we have here in our region, we have an undersized freeway system and relevant to other areas of similar population size. So if the traffic on the freeways is not necessarily better tomorrow when we implement this than it is today, I think that value of time, or value of $1, what do I get for it? If I can't really speed my trip up or have a pleasant trip, then what does ODOT's tolling program have really to offer? I think, and I don't expect an answer today, but I think we need to be mindful that if it's still bumper to bumper, from, let's say you're leaving Oregon City at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you want to go to Wilsonville, and you're going to experience bumper to bumper on I-5 and on 205. If that experience is not improved, I'm just going to take the surface streets, right? Because you're not really giving me any value. So I don't think the system is mature enough really to offer that value. So, I mean, have you calculated that into that model, into your model? Or this is the assumption that the freeway traffic that you're going to offer, the value is going to be improved. And at what point? Is this assuming the Boone Bridge is built and the I-5 bridge is built, the Rose Quarter's fixed, and 205 is fixed? Is that the presumption?
Right, so we're using all of those RTP projects. And that when we're looking at the 2045 planning year, which is the way that we move forward with the environmental analysis, is we look at a future forecast year. So in 2045, we use the assumptions that are included in the regional transportation plan, which include all of those projects. When we're looking in 2045 and comparing the scenario of no tolling and no 205 improvements project compared to tolling with the 205 improvements project, we see significant benefit on I-205 with that added capacity that comes with the third lane.
Okay, could you please send us or send Trent the PowerPoint so I can study what you have brought us here, so I can evaluate that, and I'll look at that project list further. So Councilor Sherman, I see your hand.
Yeah, and I'll just say, Commissioner Savas, I mean, I think the better thing would be to look at the list of projects, the full list of projects that is included in the RTP. So that snippet that you saw on our slide is a very short segment of what's actually included in the RTP. So we can share the PowerPoint. We can also share the link to the full list of what's included in the RTP.
Yeah, it's pretty difficult for probably anyone to figure out what things are going to be like in 2045. I think probably people are looking at day one when we open the doors on this program in 2024 or 5. You know, what is going to be the value? What's my time? How good is the system working then? I certainly, we could probably agree that the Boone Bridge won't be completed and the I-5 Interstate Bridge won't be completed, nor will the Rose Quarter be completed. So I would imagine that would be, you know, that would be a factor into people's decision of whether or not to get on the freeway system at all.
Right, we are modeling the interim year in 2027, and we're using the construction years that are assumed in the fiscally constrained list in the RTP.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you, Mandy. Councilor Sherman.
Just one last modeling question before we jump off the modeling topic. And since I've got Mr. Bosa here today, I enjoy this kind of stuff. Sorry for geeking out on this. So the process you go through, is it, I mean, do you have the ability to do kind of an iterative process, or is it more kind of you set it up and you let it run and it takes time and you come back and you revisit? The reason I ask that question is, you know, are you able to make changes to the inputs and, you know, and see the outcome, the difference in the outcomes? And then conversely, are you able to detail a desired outcome and have it change the inputs to show what would have that occur? In other words, if you say a certain level of diversion is acceptable and a certain level isn't, what do the peak hour costs look like? What do the costs, I mean, does the calculation go in both directions?
Yeah, I wish it went in both directions. Unfortunately, yes, it's usually the former, where you change your input assumptions, run the model, see what the outputs were, do that for multiple scenarios, different assumptions, and then try and build kind of an elasticity curve. So if I increase the toll by 10%, what's the impact on diversion? That's typically how we apply this model in these types of situations.
Okay, very good. I appreciate that. Thanks for the information.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to let you know anecdotally that, you know, like others on this call, I'm running for office right now. Almost every door I hit in Westland and Tualatin are freaking out about tolling, and they're not happy. They're not looking forward to it. They want it to stop. They want it to go away. And so there is a lot of work and education that needs to be done, and or listening to the community and understanding their concerns, and they are great. I also wanted just to ask a couple of quick questions about the overall project. I heard a rumor that perhaps you're not looking at adding, like helping the bottleneck by adding an additional lane. Is that correct?
That's not an accurate statement. So we are still moving forward with the plan to fully improve the 7 miles of 205 between Stafford Road and Oregon 213, including 3 lanes in each direction.
Okay, because that was something I've heard sort of on the street. And the other one is about the basalt cliff in Westland, right as you get off the Abernathy. I know originally there was a plan to do blasting there. Is that still part of the project? And when does that begin?
We're, so as you know, the Abernathy part is under construction. And I'll just need to check and see whether, I don't believe any of the blasting is included in the phase 1A work that's under construction now. We're currently working to figure out what will be included in the next construction contract. So I will need to get back to you kind of with the details about the rock blasting timeframe.
Okay, and the last piece is that there's, you know, a thank you for your presentation and everything, and working with us and taking the time to listen. But people are feeling like Highway 43 is such a disaster that they don't have great faith in ODOT right now to make sure that this project comes out the way it's supposed to. So I'm wondering if there's a way to include funds back to the local communities that are impacted to make sure that, like Mayor Hodson can do repairs on Highway 99 and other arterials that are going to be, you know, deeply impacted by people diverting off the freeway. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mayor. And I'll just say I take your earlier comments to heart about the doors you're knocking on, so I appreciate that. And in terms of the impacts, where there are impacts identified, we will mitigate them, and those mitigation projects will become part of the toll project. So that will not be a local jurisdiction responsibility to deal with those impacts, but will become a responsibility of the project.
Councilor Lewis.
Manny, just to clarify that, when you say when there are projects identified, are you only speaking narrowly to the scope of NEPA, or are you reflecting on the work that this committee has been doing for a year?
The NEPA language is the language about impacts and mitigation. So if there's an impact that's identified through the NEPA analysis, then the mitigation project is also presented. And part of the conclusion of NEPA is to show here are the mitigation commitments that are being made as part of the project. So those mitigation commitments then are required to move forward with the project. There can be other conversations in parallel and supplement to the NEPA conversation, but the NEPA focus is really in pairing mitigation with impacts.
I appreciate that. I just want to raise that that's what you have to say right now, but I think that higher level conversations promised more than NEPA, and we're at a point where all we're getting is NEPA. And that's not a win for us. That's required by the law, so be it. But it's been negotiated, and it's been shuttle diplomacy that we could get more than NEPA. And I'm going to continue to push for that, because otherwise it's there's zero win.
I would like to, and I don't know, Mandy, what you can all do, but I would really like to get some data, getting back to the inputs question, and thank you for your presentation here today. I was hoping to have available, whether it's by, something that's emailed to us or, Dropbox or something, but I'd like to see some of the traffic count data. I'd like to know how many people are diverting off our roads today that are going down Willamette Falls Drive, for example, going down Stafford Road. You've done that studies, you've based it off of 2015s. We ought to know what that is. But more importantly, I think we need to recognize that people not making an economic decision of whether or not to pay a toll, but people are diverting off the freeway today. And economics or paying a toll is not part of this whatsoever. So it's logical to assume that there'll be more people diverting when a toll is implemented if the improvements do not create a value, increase in travel, or not a decrease in travel time, for example. If that doesn't happen, then there's no reason for people to stay on the freeway or even experience a toll, because there's no value for it today. If it's congested today, the market's proving itself what it's doing. People are incentivized to get off the freeway because it's a quicker trip to go through a Stafford Road, to travel onto Willamette Falls Drive or Borland or whatnot, and navigate through our area and take shortcuts. So I'd like to get at least some idea how many people are diverting today and get those traffic counts. Is that possible to get some of that data?
I believe that's possible, so we can send it on over. I do have to say I'm back to back with presentations today, so I have to sign off this one to go to the next one. But I'm happy, I'd say if anyone else has requests for data or information and you could send them to Trent, we can collect them and share the information with the whole group, assuming you all want it, or we can work just with the person that's requesting it. So either way is fine for us.
Okay. Anything else, staff, for the good of the order? Anything else that had to be said?
I think just there's a lot coming up in the coming months. ODOT's working really hard right now, meeting with all the jurisdictions at the staff level to talk about mitigation projects, and that's ongoing. Like the meetings, I think, start on Friday and they go through next week and maybe a little beyond. Some of that information we're expecting, and the ODOT team has worked with me and talked to me about trying to bring the outcomes of some of those conversations to this next meeting. So your September meeting, we'll talk about some of those topics, and that's what we're on target for. Just wanted to say that out loud so that there's a little bit of expectation on what's next. Thanks, Mandy.
Well, thank you again for the presentation today and giving us some numbers. And as you can tell, we're all hungry for numbers, and I look forward to the next opportunity. So thank you so much.
Sounds good.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all.